This move of getting out of a comfort zone for me was something that I had thought about, right? Not something that I wanted to race to. I think from a career perspective and then from a personal perspective, Ohio makes a lot of sense. There's a term that's being used right now called the Silicon Heartland, where there are a lot of companies and a lot of projects that are really focused on tech coming to this part of Central Ohio. And I think there's a very, very long-term sort of opportunity for us, the need for power and infrastructure that follows these tech projects. And to me, it's just really exciting.
Thanks for checking out Project Cargo Professionals. We talk a lot about digitalization and AI on this show, which is why I want to tell you about our sponsor, Logiswift. Logiswift makes your operations faster and simpler, managing the entire cargo lifecycle in one smart platform. With real end-to-end visibility, you can adapt quickly when things change. Built for Project Cargo, it's now even more powerful with its new AI feature. Check out logiswift.com to take your supply chain to the next level, or message me directly and I'll connect you with Ziad, Khan and the team. Now to the show. Spo, it's good to be here with you in Ohio. Why don't we kick off by you telling us why we're in Columbus and not in Houston?
Yeah, well, thank you. So I think I'll start by saying I'm excited, right? I recently moved into a new role for Bechtel and never can quite leave logistics around. It sort of stays with you and when you really love the industry. But recently moved here with our family, literally within the last couple of days for a very large semiconductor project that we're doing in Central Ohio. Really important client for us as a company, and moving into a program management role for our offsite manufacturing scope of work, which really is quite impressive because of the amount of modules that we will be moving on this job. So bringing my logistics experience into project management, doing something a little bit new in a new part of the world. So excited to be here in Ohio, excited to be here for the interview as well.
Sounds like a big move.
It is. We have 4 kids and a small dog and a lot of stuff. So getting here was quite an adventure. But we are here now. We're excited. It's kind of took several months to kind of coordinate everything and get everyone here, and really excited for that part personally. But then from a career perspective, it's really a great opportunity in this part of the country.
So you've been on a journey at Bechtel. Tell us, how did you get into logistics in the first place?
Yeah, I like to start by saying, for people that don't know Bechtel, right? Bechtel's over 125 years old engineering, procurement, construction company. We've built some of the world's biggest, most significant type of projects that really influence the communities that we do these projects in. I started in the industry many years ago. It feels like it was yesterday. I'll talk a little bit, hopefully, about some of those experiences that feel like they were yesterday. But I grew up in Central Pennsylvania. I went to college in New York City, and really at a place called Fordham University. A lot of people may know Fordham because of Denzel Washington or Vince Lombardi, but mine was through a Jesuit priest named Bill Boyle. So Bill Boyle had bumped into me on the way home, or I should say I bumped into him on the way home from football practice, and he was asking some of us where we grew up, and had mentioned that he had a student that he used to teach many years ago who was in the trucking industry. And the rest is sort of history. Kind of made that introduction, and really fell in love both with logistics and my wife, who also went to Fordham, all right around that same time.
How did you enjoy being in trucking?
The first internship I had, and I talk about this quite a bit, and I would say from very early on, there are people I met my first internship that I'm still in touch with today, right? It really talks about like how small our industry is, how close knit it can be. I often, when people ask me like, what are some of the things that in the industry you want to really focus on, and I talk about, making sure you're capable. Technically, you understand. And for me, I learned a lot of the things from the trucking company that I work for that I still use today, right? You need to be able to understand the commercial piece. And I go back, I wasn't allowed to use a computer the first couple of years, right? So really had to understand how rates worked, how to order permits, how to really have the ability to commercially and technically get things done. And then in the end, you have to explain these things to drivers. You have to explain things to customers. And I got a flavor for all of that really in the first year. And I didn't know at the time. I often call it the three C's now. You have to be capable, you need to, commercially be aware, and you need to have the ability to communicate it. But I loved it. I got a flavor for, I was taking undergrad courses in economics, and I saw supply and demand firsthand, right? Trailers going to a port loaded, coming back empty, trying to figure out how to adjust rates and target lanes where our loaded ratio was better. So it was a great experience. I encourage people all the time to try to take internships, and for me, it made all the difference.
And who from the industry inspired you or mentored you in your early days?
Yeah, there were a ton of people. A few years ago, I was profiled, and I missed a few people. And if you know anything about breakbulk, everyone that I missed reminded me that I missed them. So I ended up finding out there were more people that.
Oh, you can mention them now.
No. I'm actually going to keep it more PC that way, so that way they can give me a hard time when they bump into me. But I think there's a few people that maybe we can talk about a little bit later. I kind of followed a few people in my career path because I saw them speak. People like Dennis Mottola and Phil Gladfelder, early days where, as I first started going to my first breakbulks, and I can remember the first one I ever went to was in New Orleans. The year was probably 2008. To put in perspective, I saw David Hammerly, who recently retired, was sort of a legend at Bechtel, spoke in 2010, was a keynote, and it was the first time I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as a career, and saw him speak. And then, I every time I go to breakbulk, it reminds me of some of the first times you did certain things. I bump into people, and again, the person will know that called me and said, "Hey, that RFQ you sent was terrible, right? If you want to get better at this in the industry, you got to have better quality RFQs." First time someone showed me, why being under a suspended load is a bad idea, right? From a safety perspective. So I kind of think back early on of things and experiences that I went through that sort of remind me when I see those people every year at breakbulk or some of the other industry events, and it resonates. And honestly, it helps me sort of remind myself to tell other early career people that we're meeting that if you don't tell them about that experience, they may not get it themselves firsthand, right? So the list is really endless. I mean, there's probably stories that we can tell outside of this, but really appreciate a lot of the people I've interacted with over the years.
I went to Switzerland. I had an interview with Sandro Lapori. I think he was somebody that you've mentioned previously.
100%. Sandro is a person. I asked Sandro once, and trying to really learn the industry as I moved from being on the trucking side as a service provider over to the shipper side, and wanted to understand more why, what is the role of a freight forwarder, for example. So I asked Sandro once, and Sandro, what do you need a freight forwarder for? Why do we need them? Why can't we just do this ourselves? And in Sandro's way, he said, because they're more clever than us. And I said, really, is that true? And Sandro said, well, hold on. And he picked up the phone and he made a phone call to one of the forwarders that he interacts with, and he said, who is the best customs broker in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia? And at the time, I didn't know. We barely had the internet. We definitely didn't have LinkedIn yet. And the person on the other end said, well, Sandro, what type of cargo is it, and where is it coming from? And it immediately indicated that from being more clever and resourceful and having relationships, they were in a position to pre-internet really to know these things and know exactly to go this direction or go that direction. I wonder quite often, and I think it's a question the industry asks of itself, like, what is the role, the ever-evolving role of freight forwarders, of some of the logistics service providers, and for us as shippers, how do we interact with those different parties? Where do we find value in each other, right?
And how did the move to Bechtel come about?
Again, I almost went to Bechtel in 2008. I had talked to Dennis Mottola in passing. Was kind of interested, knew a little bit about the company. Having been on the carrier side, it was kind of interesting to see what they did, and at that time, new into the industry, really trying to understand what is an EPC, like what's the difference between an EPC and maybe an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer. And as I started to learn that a little bit more, I had a discussion with Dennis, and he had an opportunity in their old Frederick, Maryland office. And I was right in the process of getting married, and I passed. I said, not going to happen. And then I went to work for Alstom which is where I met Sandro,
Sandro.
and some other greats like Greg Gowans and mentioned Phil, and some others that today are sort of dispersed through the industry. Some stayed with Alstom and GE, and some have moved on. But in I think 2012, Phil Gladfelder decided to go to Bechtel in a strategic management position, and not only did I follow, but about 3 months after him, the person that just replaced me in the corporate role, Andy Young, also left Alstom and came over to Bechtel all around the same time. So that was really the pathway. I think it kind of started with Dennis, and then when Phil, who I have a ton of respect for, made that move, it kind of indicated it was a good opportunity for a few of us to follow.
And many people will remember you as corporate manager of logistics at Bechtel. Talk a bit about that role and the responsibilities you had over the years.
Yeah, that was a role that was sort of the thing that I was always really respectful of the things Dennis was doing, and Gary Strom and some of the people that were involved with the corporate logistics team. When I was in the field at that time when Dennis had decided to retire, and was honored to take that role. He was in that role for over 20 years. So moving into that position was, carried a lot of responsibility. I think one of the things that obviously no one expected was that about a year into that role, the pandemic hit, right? And all the things that I thought we were going to do, and I say this quite often in our industry guarantees change and they give no guarantees, right? So we were in an opportunity to really look at how the team was structured. We did some strategic things in the early days of the pandemic to ensure that we were still providing great value to our customers. A lot of the projects didn't stop; they kept going. So really challenged, like everybody at the time, to try to figure out how to navigate through some of those challenges. We also I thought it was a great opportunity in that position to lean into engineering for the first time, lean into construction. A lot of people in our industry are so focused on moving something from here to there. And I'll quote Andy. Andy Young often says 99% of the work is done in the office, 2 years advance, and it's just that 1% that we really do in the field to kind of tweak things and get it just right. So when I say we as a team really leaned into engineering. We started doing more things on the design front end of our projects. It sort of created this opportunity to influence sizes and dimensions, and even in some cases the size of the dock that we were going to build for the projects. We ended up even coining a term called engineered logistics, which is a little bit more strategic than just your traditional, let's figure out how to move something from here to there. So that was a huge push during that period. And then I'd say the last thing that changed for me at least was that at the time the head of our functions, I was asking him, what else should we be doing? And he said, let's have logistics get closer to our end customers, right? And typically we will on a project when we're executing, but in this case, it was encouraged to do it earlier, right? Go meet them, talk about their safety programs, talk about technology innovations that we're launching and leading, talk about sustainability, talk about different things that we're doing that are sort of in a safe space, right? We're not going and talking about rates or things to sort of influence who wins work. It was really about collaborating, being partners with them. And I would say it influenced Bechtel how we sort of structured some things in the corporate space to look at suppliers differently, right? We had previously been very focused on you were either qualified or not. We decided to create a few tiers, and some of those tiers or levels of qualification were very specific to understanding who our clients wanted to use, and it became more and more of an interaction with them to understand why they preferred certain companies or companies they didn't prefer. But it was better to know that ahead of time going into it than it was later once the project was in execution. Right.
And you've stressed that logistics is a support function. Why do you point that out, and what lessons do LSPs need to take from that?
Yeah, we can feel very important some days, right? And it's usually the days when the ship's loading or that big piece is delivering to the job site, and the photos are being taken and the video comes out, and then it does. It's a great feeling of accomplishment, especially when some of these things have taken a long time. But at the end of the day, at least for an EPC, we exist to support construction. Bechtel builds, right? We build some of the biggest things, first of a kinds, really complex things that other people can't do. And if we can't help them deliver, so that they can build, then we fail them and we fail the company. So I think in our space, that's really been the differentiator. We know others are out there trying to do it, but I think the level of effort that we have to the detail of, as I mentioned, doing things a year, 2, 3 years in advance to make sure it gets done right, give clients that surety of outcome that we can try to promise them, is really the differentiator for what Bechtel tries to sell, and we're there to make sure that happens, right?
And you've spoken about the need to take risks sometimes. Give us the story of your transition in this new role and talk about whether that was a risk.
Yeah, so I am very very risk adverse. Bechtel is as well, and I you would think for some of the big jobs, especially when we take on a lump sum job or even some of the very complex cost reimbursable jobs, they're sometimes harder than even a lump sum of trying to understand what did we just sign up for. We will take the right opportunities. I think I try to take the right opportunities. This move of getting out of a comfort zone for me was something that I had thought about, right? Not something that I wanted to race to. I wanted to make sure it was the right situation, the right opportunity for me and my family. I think from a career perspective and then from a personal perspective, Ohio makes a lot of sense. There's a term that's being used right now called the Silicon Heartland, where there are a lot of companies and a lot of projects that are really focused on tech coming to this part of Central Ohio. And I think there's a very, very long-term sort of opportunity for us, the need for power and infrastructure that follows these tech projects. And to me, it's just really exciting. I get to talk to universities every now and then and students about opportunities, and this is one, whether they're coming into our industry or looking to become teachers or just various careers and trying to share like where some of those hot spots are, and Columbus seems to be one right now for sure.
And what do you think your supply chain background will add to this role?
Yeah, I keep saying I talked to my mentor before I took this role, and I said, what do you think? And he said, well, as long as half the role in the beginning is stuff you already know, and you're willing to learn the other half, then you can keep challenge yourself and keep growing. I think it was great advice. I look at we talk about having wisdom on when to do things, and having knowledge is one part of it. But I think as we transition, and I encourage as others try to look at where they want to go in their career path, whether it's roles within their current company or going to other companies. As you learn to sort of navigate and have that wisdom, you can carry some of those tangible skills that you learn in the logistics sector over into project management or project controls or even business development, because you start to understand maybe not the details of every problem, but you understand the problems, right? And I think in logistics, we get to touch so many different things at different phases. Maybe not every company, but at Bechtel, I think we really do get engaged on, from those early days all the way through execution to close out of a job, that we feel and appreciate what some of the problems that project management has been dealing with. So we keep saying every day there's a new issue that we want to address, new opportunity to learn is really what I'm trying to emphasize. But I think that's really it, is that, we in logistics tend to have a good feel for various cultures around the world. We have a good feel for how the international footprint of moving material matters. And when you blend that into some of the problems that we sometimes face, it allows us to get more quickly, I think, to helping the team figure out the best solutions. So that's the hope, right?
And there's probably a long list of things to choose from, but what do you think is the hardest thing about being a logistics service provider or a shipper today?
Well, so from an LSP, we said earlier, what's the role of a service provider? I think, early days using Sandro's quote, they're more clever than shippers because they had access to information, they had a better network. Today, every now and then I'll challenge this. If I asked a college student to find a customs broker in Jeddah, they probably can as quickly as anyone else, right? And is it the right one? Okay, that's where you start to get into that wisdom piece and the experience that comes in. But when you really go back to what I mentioned earlier, those 3 C's, right? When you're interacting with somebody, they need to be technically capable, right? If they're not capable, especially for a company like Bechtel, that will surface very, very quickly. So we want to interact with people, and I encourage service providers, make sure you're not just putting the business development person in front that can communicate really well. They got to be able to show their technical savvy, and they got to be commercially aware, right? We never want to sign a bad deal with anyone because it really should be a partnership, and having that commercial awareness that we can interact and both win in that partnership is really, a big theme for us, which is why I keep going back to those three C's. But I think there's going to be opportunities. AI is artificial intelligence is a big topic. Some people use it more as a verb and may not really appreciate all the things that it can do. But I think there's some opportunity for service providers to play in that space where shippers may not want to develop and build things in a singular environment. They may want to tap into tools that are more universal and forward.
Because logistics is just one part of it, as you were saying.
That's just one part of it, right? And if we build it only for our view, we've seen this with some other technologies that we've tried to advance within logistics. Is that could we follow through and maybe come up with something that works for us? Yes. Will it continue to sustain over time? Will it evolve? Probably only if other people are really involved. So I think there's a space there for shippers and for service providers to collaborate in those types of ideas. I think a few years ago there was a heavy push for understanding how do we advance reporting on Scope 3 emissions. I think some of the AI, some of the other topics that are hot right now have kind of advanced beyond that, but hasn't gone away, right? I think the ability to understand how we report on emissions and things like that are going to be extremely important later to partner with your service providers and understand how they plan to do it, how they plan to capture it, and that you can stand behind what they report. Right?
I think that's really interesting because it sounds like what you're saying is that the LSPs, you're almost encouraging them to take the lead with developing some of these AI and other tech tools because they have the space to do that.
I would say more partnership, right? Because it's like anything else. If Bechtel goes and builds things that we think our clients want, we don't ask them, we could end up in the wrong direction, right? And sometimes in any scenario, you can get accused of doing things because you think you know better than someone else. I think this is those opportunities where you can collaborate, as I mentioned in my previous role, and I'm doing it today with our current client, to try to understand more about what's important to them. How do they like to see data? What's the realness of real-time data? We talk all the time. You can go on Amazon and order something, have it tomorrow for free, right? And it's tracked perfectly. Should we be able to do that in our industry for the amount of money we spend? Probably. Now I get to sort of explain to our customers why sometimes that there's a lag in that data. And I think any of those things that help us provide more predictability, more surety of outcome in how we interact is a win, right?
Talk a bit about the Ships Act and how you see that playing out, and whether you think in and of itself that will generate project cargo work in this country.
Yeah, the Ships Act and the sort of the bipartisan view to kind of look at how do we increase the number of ships being built here in the U.S. I think is a huge undertaking. We often remind people, most people don't know this, that at one time Bechtel built hundreds of ships during World War II for Liberty ships, right? I don't know today that that's the space that we would go into, maybe, but I think at the end of the day, the Ships Act has potential for a few things. It increases not only the amount of ships, it influences how much cargo, right? So without the cargo, the ships don't move. And more importantly, the crews that kind of need to be trained and the seamen that need to kind of support that effort. And it all has to kind of grow at the same level. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us. Bechtel participates with like the Exporters Competitive Maritime Council. About a year or so ago, we did one of our annual meetings or periodic meetings at SUNY Maritime, right, where we invited cadets that were there to come listen, regular students as well, to come listen to some of the industry leaders within ECMC to kind of share career path opportunities. And I think there's got to be, we talk all the time about bringing talent. That's going to be a big demand. If we continue to go down the path for more U.S. ships that may be U.S. flagged, that require U.S. crews, it only really works if you have all three together. I would say the other piece of that's really important to shippers is that if there is a voluntary use of U.S. flagships or U.S. built ships that are in the program, do you get preference at cargo ports, right? And I think that's one of the topics that's been discussed at a lot of different industry groups. I think in the bill that went forward, there was a provision for that to see if there were opportunities for shippers that wanted to see cargo move faster through ports. And to me, it all sort of streamlines in one way. But I think if you step back from it, looking at it from a Bechtel perspective, um, it's a really big opportunity to have the right sort of oversight for redundancy of design, the type of ships that will be used in the parts and the repairs. If there's too much variation in those types of ships, then I think it's going to lead to longer term, OpEx problems. I think the concern is the front end capex of building these ships in the U.S., but I think a lot of us are really leaning into technology, and if there's any differentiator beyond cost that will potentially, tip the scale in one direction or another, is if those ships are more efficient, more technologically advanced, maybe semi-autonomous, that give the ability to be more competitive from a fuel usage and operations perspective over the life of that vessel, then I think things change. But we'll see. We'll see.
And you recently became a Bechtel Fellow. Can you talk a bit about that and what that recognition means to you?
Yeah, when I first came to Bechtel, in the old building we were in Houston, if you went up to one of the floors, they had all these pictures of men and women that were fellows, and I always wondered, like, who were some of these people? And a few years ago, my mentor at the time had said, I think you need to meet this individual. And they introduced me to one of the Bechtel Fellows who was, and these people are experts. They're well renowned in their different sectors. Whether it's LNG technology or welding technology. It's really amazing that they are recognized. They're published. They have patents, and they are contributors to the industry and to Bechtel for many, many years. So as the first fellow for supply chain logistics, I was a little bit surprised. I was like, okay, what happens now? A few people gave me a hard time about do you get a rocking chair now, or what happens? And I said, no, not ready for that. But it really creates an opportunity for us from a different perspective to interact with our customers. A lot of our customers also have fellow programs, and there's a lot of industry groups. There aren't many in logistics supply chain, so I will encourage the rest of the industry to really think about how that looks and how we interact. But it gives us a position to immediately go to a university and say, we'd like to sit down, we'd like to invite some of your students to work on a real life project, a capstone project. And the doors immediately open when you walk in as a Bechtel Fellow. So I think from that perspective, it's going to probably do more for other people than it will for me, to be honest. I think the long term potential to just further integrate and be given that platform to share what we do in supply chain logistics is just limitless, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your involvement in the universities, because I know that's something that's been important to you.
Yep.
What would you say you're learning from the next generation, and what are you passing on to them?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I first started to engage with some of these capstone projects, and it was at that time somebody more senior saying, "Hey, we need a few people to go to the school because we're recruiting there," and the intent is you go, you give them an idea or a problem to work on, and then hopefully you find a student or two that's like, hey, that person's great, we should probably hire them on. And that was sort of my first introduction. But then what I found out was probably more than half the time the students get more out of it than we do, right? We work on these big projects that are in their backyard in some cases. They're, I think about when I was growing up, what was near me to actually go learn, and didn't have a lot of exposure. I grew up near Hershey, so I would smell chocolate and things like that, but wasn't going down that path. And for students that are serious about becoming engineers and world-class supply chain people, they can come to these projects and actually see what's happening, right? So I always say they probably get more out of it than we do, but every now and then they come back with an idea. And I think the difference for us is that they are not in our world yet. They're dealing with apps that do different things. They're dealing with AI in a different way than maybe we're thinking about it. And often when we interact with the students, these sort of naive questions come up, but then become very insightful, right? And whenever we get one of those, that's usually where there's an opportunity to really run with it. We recently hired a great student from the last capstone project, and she just started here in Ohio. So I think that just resonates over and over again, that we keep growing that foundation of experience back to those 3 C's again of giving people the opportunity to really get that technical knowledge early on. And I tell them, right, even if you don't stay at Bechtel, it's a tangible skill that you learn, just like I learned at the trucking company, that stays with you the rest of your career, right?
And I read you spoke about a Holy Trinity.
Yeah, I'm calling it now the three C's, right?
That's advanced to the three C's.
That is now the three C's. I figured it was too hard to try to explain it, so I think it is. I can't say enough over the years where I've seen people that have had a ton of potential and maybe only achieved so much, or they failed with a bad relationship because they didn't work on it, and then they didn't get the response they needed from that service provider because of some of their interactions. I just really encourage everyone as early in their career as they can try to focus on all three. It's uncomfortable. Some people, I'm obviously a little more extroverted. Some other people are more introverted. How do you use those skills that you have and still have some level of all three of those C's? And it's obviously it's a lot more than that. But I think from a logistics perspective, you can be a fantastic, transport engineer. You can figure out how to rig things and secure things. If you can't explain to the person that's going to spend the money on it, did you succeed, right? Can you actually then bring it through in the end and stay within the budget of the concept that you designed? And that's, I really look at it as they're really interconnected for the people, that I think have the biggest inner circles are the ones that network effectively across all those different people that understand where they're best suited and really genuinely care about those other people from a professional perspective in our industry, right?
And for those people who are a bit older and a bit more advanced in their career, but maybe feeling stuck in a rut or wondering whether to move on, what's been your advice to them?
I'll go back to some of those firsts. I remember the first time somebody showed me an Access database. And at first I was like, oh man, this is terrible. Why is this person showing me this? And they kept pushing. And then when it clicked and I understood how you could use data to be more effective in conversations you were having, to better communicate if you need data to kind of prove your point. So that was sort of an indicator to me that it's more than just being able to talk. You got to have something that can back it up. And I all the time encourage when people, I just the other day I got a phone call from someone outside of Bechtel, and they were like, I'm thinking about doing something different. I just heard you're doing something. What do you think? And I think some of the advice that I would give people is if you're not great with using data, maybe figure out how to get in Excel. I was encouraged earlier on, and I've probably countless people have encouraged to go into a master's program for industrial engineering, which may not seem like the typical path. A lot of people will take an MBA path or try to take something more advanced in supply chain. But I think several of us have gone through this IE program, and it really helps you figure out how to apply data and some of those industrial engineering tools that attack these big problems, right? And this is, again, where it gets a little bit more strategic instead of just transactional. The transactions, I don't ever want to say that they're easy. They're not. They're still very hard to move that one thing. But when you want to fix bigger problems that are expansive at scale, I think using some of those industrial engineering tools. So for us, I'm constantly sort of challenging where we're recruiting from, right? We don't want to just recruit purely from supply chain programs. Go look industrial engineering, go recruit from the construction, sciences, and see where we can get people into the team that have different perspectives on how to accomplish this work.
What's been your career highlight so far?
I think it's being the fellow. I'm still new. It's only a year in. I have 20 plus years until I can try to retire. I got to pay for college for ×4. So I have a lot of excitement to try to continue to grow that. But it's such an honor. I've said it many times. There were several people that I cared greatly about that should have also been recognized in some way as a vice president or as a fellow that didn't happen at that time. So I think I look back and say, well, what changed? I think COVID really put a spotlight on supply chain logistics, on the importance of it. And those of us that know, we've always known that it's important, and it really drives a lot of how our projects execute. It really came to the forefront when cost of containers were going through the roof and you couldn't get into ports and things like that. And for those of us that were able to help navigate some of those things, I think really started to get people to look at how we do things differently. So for me, I think that's the highlight. I hope that's the lowest of the best to have to look forward to from here. But I think there's that would have to be it. I think there's such a responsibility that goes with being a fellow at Bechtel that I take it quite seriously. Right.
And where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? What's left that you still want to achieve?
Yeah, I thought about this, when I was wondering if I was going to get this type of question. And the first thing I'd say is if I said anything other than Ohio, my wife would kill me because we just mobilized, we just moved here. But all jokes aside, I mentioned the Silicon Heartland. I think the amount of opportunity for the type of project that Bechtel is really good at building is ripe, right? There's, as I mentioned, semiconductor data centers. The amount of infrastructure that will be needed to support AI, then power follows, and the rest of the infrastructure, road infrastructure, telecoms infrastructure that kind of follows behind it. I would love to be here for a long time, right? Our youngest is 7, so you can do the math and figure out that that's at least the mental commitment as a family we were willing to make from a career perspective as well. But you never know, right? I said the industry constantly has change and there's no guarantees. So I think the opportunity at some point to take what I learned in this program role and maybe apply it across multiple projects is there. Our headquarters is just outside of Washington, D.C., and I've found personal value engaging with U.S. Department of Transportation and with the U.S. Maritime Administration. So maybe more of an opportunity to lean in some of the government projects that we get involved with. And you never know. Back in Houston could always happen. Also,
Never say never.
never say never.
What do you like doing outside of work? And what do the family make of Ohio? What's the first impressions?
Well, we have a lot of things to go do. Right? We've done a lot in the first few days. At some point, my wife and I keep saying the vacation's got to end. Right? Can't keep going out for ice cream every day. Right? So I think the kids are excited to get into school and really start to meet people. I've always been in the sports and enjoyed, athletics and getting the kids into their own athletics. They all love doing different things. They're all really talented at different things. We even just recently we were invited by Ohio State University and their swim coach to go visit their school. One of our daughters swims, and although she's young and she's got to keep working hard, he was grateful enough to sort of give her some insight and the rest of the kids on if you want to compete at the highest levels, this is the kind of work you need to do. This is how many hours a student athlete's going to swim per week, right? Which is kind of, awakening. So I think, we are committed to the community. We're going to the local schools in the same town that we're building the project. We've been to the church that we go to there. So we want to lean in as much as we can to the community. And like I said, I think that the doors are already open to schools like Ohio State and some others. There's a lot of great schools in the region. And when you really look at, let's say, a 300-mile radius of this area, there are so many great universities and colleges that Bechtel has worked with in the past and can work with again in the future. So again, I think that sort of opportunity just is awesome when you really think about it.
And it's not long left now. We've got Breakbulk Americas, the big anniversary event coming up in a few weeks' time. What do you think everybody's going to be talking about this year?
Yeah, I think the thing that everyone's been talking about is tariffs and the SHIPS Act, and I think those are, I gave some insights when they were kind of looking at content that's got to be one that's really important. I think the challenging thing is that we just went through an administration change, so there are people from the prior administration. Again, a lot of the things associated with SHIPS Act was very bipartisan. So although they're probably really interested and excited to talk about it, I think they're kind of frozen at this point from what they can say. So I don't know that anyone really knows, honestly, on where we're going to go. But I think that will be hugely important to understand not only what shippers are going to do and what opportunities, as you mentioned, is this an opportunity to expand more breakbulk cargo to build ships? But then also, what are the carriers going to do, right? Are they going to lean into this and maybe invest? There's been some things in the news about some carriers are saying they're going to do that. Others may not. So I think that's an exciting, sort of interesting concept to kind of hear, like we always do at Breakbulk, firsthand from the decision makers, the people that can actually influence these outcomes and see what they're thinking. I think AI is going to be another big topic. Again, it's tough right now because I'm not sure that people have zeroed in on really how best to apply it. I think I know at the end of this upcoming month, we have a couple presentations internally at Bechtel on AI concepts to try to decide where we invest money to start to get the initial groundwork set and then potentially start inviting in partners to talk about ways that we can apply AI. I think the other thing that I mentioned earlier, sustainability will, my opinion, will probably come down a little bit because these other two topics are just so big and overwhelming. But The other thing that's probably a little bit softer, but really important to companies like us, and I think a lot of people, is that the demand and expectation for real time updates has done a few things, right? It's made our ability to manage shipments better. But when we're talking about different time zones, I think it's also created a really, really troubling, from a mental health perspective, because you talk to people in the industry that they burned out quicker. They have, I would say, the passion to do such a great job 24 hours a day, and now because of Teams and you can meet with anyone
It's
anytime.
nonstop.
It's nonstop, and Bechtel is really advocating within the construction industry to bring more awareness to mental health and try to offer things to sort of bridge gaps when people are having a hard time. And I'm worried in our industry because some of us that are now becoming old timers, we're used to working around the clock anyways, and this just accelerates it, right? So as early people come in, early career people or people from outside the industry start. You had asked earlier what are they asking about? I think they are worried more about life work balance, and it is a big dynamic, between maybe how older generations would operate, newer generations are being challenged, and then overarching, you have this big issue of everybody wants an answer right now, right? And that puts stress on a lot of people, and I think knowing how to balance that, and sometimes it's okay to put the phone down, and it's okay to go for a walk. I'll share something. For ages they used to do lunch and learns, where a company would come in around lunchtime and maybe present on a topic that is educational, right? And they do it at lunch because people were willing to take a little bit of a break. And during COVID, we encouraged people to do walk and talks. So if you have a conference call that wasn't necessarily in front of a computer and you need to listen and need to be engaged, go take the call and go for a walk, get out of the house a little bit. And I think that was very healthy for some people that were finding themselves on conference calls all day in the house, and then
Except in Houston in August.
It's okay. You get a good sweat when you're out there. Yeah.
And you've been a speaker at Breakbulk. You've attended for many years. Give us some of your highlights of Breakbulk Americas and why it's been so important for you to take part.
Yeah, I as I was kind of thinking about this, I thought about when did being an attendee versus a participant, an active participant, change for me. And the first couple of years I went, I was there just to collect as many business cards as I could and meet people. And I probably bugged people and chased them around when they were trying to do other things. But early in your career, you should do that. Go chase people, bug them, ask them for their cards. Absolutely. Ask a lot of questions. Be curious. But I was asked I don't remember the year, but it was in Shanghai when they used to do Breakbulk there, to be a speaker at Education Day. And it was the first time I had to really prepare and do it in a different culture where things were being translated. And from that point, I was like, you know what, if I'm going to continue to grow my career, I think I now have a responsibility. Companies encouraging us to lean into some of these conversations and be on panels and give content ideas. So I think for me, and I encourage others that if maybe you've been at Breakbulk a lot, you don't come over to where they have panels or keynote speakers. Get away from the booths from time to time. Stay in the booths, right? Go meet as many people as you can. But then also there's that other piece to see and hear perspectives from others. So to me, that's always been the highlight, to see and hear what people are talking about. I think specifically, I'll forget the years, but it was the point is this was pre-COVID, and there was an individual who's at Bechtel. He's one of our innovation managers now, a guy named Trent Lejeune. So Trent and I and a few others had contributed for a concept where we did a virtual cargo inspection remotely pre-COVID, and we were doing it to show what technology was there. That we had our insurance adjuster backstage, and we were able to use some technology to holographically show cargo and do a cargo inspections remotely. Now, little did we know, 2 years later, everybody was trying to now use some derivative of that to do cargo inspections at ports where you weren't allowed to travel to the ports, right? And realizing that the same issues that we were looking at, where Wi-Fi connectivity at a port really limits your ability to FaceTime and show cargo. And so for me, that was one where you saw it on people's faces from the stage, right? Where it was starting to click, and little did we know at that time some of the challenge of the industry and how we would normally do a cargo inspection needed to change, right? And I think there's always catalysts that kind of push things in one direction or another. And for me, as I look back at Breakbulk Americas, they were the team that sort of set up the program was really open to bringing technology in, and to this day, I'm very appreciative of that. I think the other one that has sort of over the years given me inspiration is just hearing. They used to do the person that's going to retire, right? That's it's both ends, right? It's the early career people who are really up and coming, and I always joke that they publish that list of who's up and coming, and then I whisper to Andy and say, okay, those are the guys we need to go recruit, guys and girls, right? So, but then also you have the other end of it of people that are people like Eddie DeFrancesco who are coming,
the legends.
Yeah, they're never going to retire, right? But they're probably going to slow down a little bit, and hearing what they have to think, and usually the best part, and again I won't quote anybody here, but the best parts of that industry event don't always happen on the stage, right? They happen on one-on-one, going back to those 3 C's, having those relationships and engaging, and and it's always fun because you have some people that I always bump into a particular person every year, and he always says to me, "Have you heard any good rumors?" And I said, no. Yeah, I said, every year we don't talk about rumors. And he said, well, if you haven't heard one by noon at Breakbulk, you got to go start one, right? So I always find that fun, that people can go there and be quite serious. A lot of work gets done, but you can also reconnect with people, from overseas that sometimes you haven't seen in a while. And I think that's what really solidifies the event. It brings people back every year. And I would just encourage that, over the years, it's gone in different directions, that get back to the core, right? Getting to know who's there, who are the best people in the industry that are getting work done, who's resourceful and effective, and then listening a little bit about perspective and where things are going. Right.
So now I'm tempted to ask what rumors you started at Breakbulk.
None, never. Well, it's not true. I will share one. So hopefully she doesn't get upset. Susan Otway, who I call the Oracle, right? She has been able to predict where the market's been going for many years, and I told her many years ago that. There's always she's interested in indices. What indices are you following as a shipper? And I won't give away the secret, but I've told her a couple of times. I said there's a few indices that you should pay attention to, and then all you have to say is, well, I heard Susan said, and then all of a sudden your rumor starts. But that's usually more publicly on stage as a joke, right?
So imagine you're hosting a dinner party at Breakbulk Americas this year. Who are you going to invite? Past or present from the industry, 3 people.
Okay, so in this case, for those that know me, I cannot answer the question unless we talk about what type of food we're going to have. So if I was just going to say an angle that I would go for is if we were doing a backyard pizza oven, it's a couple Bechtel guys, right? So Dennis Mottola, Phil Gladfelter, and Andy Young, right? People that I think have not only inspired me in a lot of different ways, but have been there for me in hard times and in fun times. And I think the reason I mentioned the 3 of them, not only because they appreciate some of the things we've done at Bechtel, but we've actually had those pizza oven parties, right? And the discussions that we would have debating on what's considered to be cost avoidance versus cost savings, while we should be enjoying the pizza, are quite memorable, right? And talking through, what is the type of person that we want to try to recruit? Where, what kind of background? Should it be a supply chain only person, or should we start introducing these options for, industrial engineers or construction managers or even mechanical engineers into logistics, right? And I've had some fantastic conversations with Dennis and Phil and Andy in the past, and some laughs about it. And I miss those days, right? As we all retire and go in different directions. I cherish the times we actually did do that hypothetical dinner for real. Right?
And just a couple of quick fire questions to finish. Somebody's just arrived in Houston for Breakbulk. What's your top tip for somewhere to eat or drink?
All right. So because we moved, I've already heard it. So it's probably H-E-B. If you guys don't know what H-E-B is, it's a grocery store. You probably wonder why I'm saying a grocery store, because they make tortillas and barbecue. And our kids are wondering where they're going to get those now, right? So I would encourage anyone that is in Houston, go try those. Go get some good barbecue. And if you find your way in Ohio, probably want to look for some different food. But I know I already have an instruction that when I come back to Houston, I got to hand carry some tortillas from HEB back to Columbus. So
keep the family happy.
To keep the family happy. So I would definitely send you to HEB.
Okay, and you've got a disaster shipment and you've got one call for somebody that can help you out, but it can't be somebody within your organization. Who are you
Yeah.
going to call?
So this one is probably not the angle that most would expect, but my grandfather, who knew nothing about transportation, was a carpenter and very practical. He used to constantly make fun of engineers, and I think when there's a disaster shipment, the last thing you need to do is panic, right? And I joke very oftenly. He's been gone for a long time now, but used to give some pretty off the wall advice. But as I got older, I tend to appreciate a lot more. So I think the advice that I would give for anyone dealing with a disaster shipment, don't panic, right? Call people you trust that maybe don't know anything about it, and baseline yourself first. Calm down a little bit, and sometimes having those conversations with people that appreciate what you do but may not know all the details, I think really help accelerate, at least for me, and bring clarity to trying to solve those problems. If it's urgent, I would say just make sure it's someone you trust.
And complete the sentence. If I wasn't in logistics, I would be
a football player.
Spo, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for having me in Ohio, and wishing you all the best for your new role.
Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Hi, it's Leslie Meredith with the Breakbulk team, and welcome to Voices of Breakbulk Americas, produced by the Project Cargo Professionals podcast to help us celebrate the 35th anniversary of Breakbulk Americas. Enjoy the show and register now so that you can join us in Houston this fall, September 30th through October 2nd for Breakbulk Americas.